greetings and welcome. In the stillness of nights long past, people gathered to tell stories woven with wonder, struggle, dread, and hope. Each tale became a doorway into a hidden world where imagination burned bright and wisdom lingered through the centuries. Tonight, we walk together into that eternal realm once more. The Nix of the Mill-Pond. Once upon a time, there was a miller who lived with his wife in quiet satisfaction. Fortune had smiled on their household. They possessed money, fertile fields, and a sturdy mill whose wheels turned faithfully with the flowing stream. Each passing year seemed to pour new blessings upon them, and their prosperity grew so steadily that neighbors whispered that luck itself must dwell beneath their roof. But happiness, like the river, runs in shifting courses. As suddenly as wealth had blossomed, so too did it wither away. Year by year, the coffers emptied, the land yielded less, and the strong mill fell into disrepair. At length, the miller could scarcely claim the building as his own. He grew weary with care. When he lay upon his bed after long labor, sleep fled from him, and his heart tossed as restlessly as his body. One morning, before even the cock crowed, the miller rose in despair and wandered into the chill dawn air. Perhaps, thought he, the open fields and the fresh breath of morning might ease the heaviness that crushed his breast. As he stepped across the worn planks of the mill dam, the first pale beam of sunlight broke through the mist. At that very instant, he heard the faint ripple of water behind him. Turning in wonder, he beheld a vision. From the pond arose a woman of surpassing beauty. She lifted herself slowly from the depths. Her long hair, shining like liquid gold, she drew with gentle hands away from her shoulders. Yet it fell in gleaming waves to veil her fair white form. The miller's heart froze, for he knew her at once. It was the Nix of the Mill-Pond, the water spirit whose home lay beneath those green depths. His feet faltered, not knowing whether to flee or to remain. But the Nix raised her sweet voice and called him softly by name. Why dost thou wander so sorrowful in the morning light? At first he could not speak, for fear held him silent, yet her words were tender, and soon courage stirred in him. Haltingly, he confessed how once he had dwelt in wealth and gladness, but now had fallen into poverty so great that he no longer knew how to provide for his household. "Be at peace," answered the Nix, her eyes gleaming like moonlit water. "I shall make thee richer and happier than ever before. Only promise me one thing. Give me the young thing that has just been born in thy house." The miller's thoughts turned quickly. What else could she mean? Said he within himself. But some small creature, a kitten, perhaps, or a puppy. Surely no great harm in that. And so, desperate for relief, he swore the promise she demanded. Smiling, the Nix sank beneath the pond once more, and the water stilled as though no ripple had ever stirred it. With lighter heart, the miller hastened home, but had scarcely reached the threshold when the maidservant ran out with joyful cries. "Rejoice, master, rejoice! A son is born to thee." Then the miller stood, as if thunderstruck. In a moment, he saw the cunning trick. The Nix had known all along of the child, and he had been ensnared by his own careless bargain. With head hanging low, he went to his wife's bedside. She asked in wonder, "Why dost thou not rejoice over our fine boy?" With bitter sighs, he told her the dreadful promise. "What use are riches to me," he moaned, "if I am to lose my only child? Yet what can I do now?" Neither wife nor kinsfolk, who came to offer congratulations, could find counsel to comfort him. But the promise held true. Wealth returned with double force. All that the miller laid his hands upon prospered. His barns filled of their own accord. His cupboards overflowed. And each morning, it seemed as if unseen spirits had multiplied his gold in the night. Yet in the midst of his prosperity, his soul was tormented. Whenever he passed the pond, dread seized him, lest the Nix rise and claim her debt. He never allowed the boy to wander near the water. "Beware," he would cry, "touch not the pond, for a hand will rise and drag thee under." Time, however, dulls even sharpest fear. Years rolled by, and the Nix did not appear. The child grew to a sturdy youth, strong and clever. At length, he was apprenticed to a huntsman, where he proved so skillful that the lord of the land himself took him into service. In the same village, there lived a maiden of true heart and gentle beauty. The huntsman loved her dearly, and when his lord perceived it, he gifted them a little cottage. There they married, and their days flowed in peace and tender joy. But fate, which slumbers long, awakens at last. One day, the huntsman chased a swift roe from the forest into open fields, and after much pursuit struck it down. Wishing to cleanse his bloodied hands, he went unsuspecting to the waterside. Alas, the very mill-pond his father had so feared. No sooner had he dipped his fingers than the Nix arose, smiling sweetly, and wound her dripping arms about him. In an instant, she drew him beneath the waves, which closed and glittered calmly as though nothing had happened. When evening came and the huntsman did not return, his wife grew troubled. She sought him in field and wood, but found nothing. At last she hastened to the pond, and there discovered his hunting pouch lying on the shore. Then her heart knew the truth. She cried aloud in anguish, wrung her hands, and called his name in vain. The water gave no answer. Only the cold face of the moon gazed back at her. Night after night, she haunted the pond's edge, wandering without rest, sometimes shrieking, sometimes sobbing, until at last exhaustion cast her into deep sleep. Then she dreamed. She climbed through wild crags and thorny thickets, beaten by storm, until she reached a summit where all was bright and calm. Before her lay a flowery meadow and a fair cottage, and at its door sat an old woman with hair like snow, beckoning kindly. When morning dawned, the wife resolved to follow her dream. She climbed the mountain and found all as she had seen. The old woman welcomed her, and hearing her grief, said gently, "Be comforted. I shall help thee. Take this golden comb. When the moon is full, sit by the pond and comb thy hair with it. Then lay it down upon the shore. Thou shalt see what happens." The wife obeyed. At moonrise, she combed her dark hair with the shining comb, then set it upon the bank. The water stirred, a wave bore the comb away, and behold, the head of her beloved rose from the depths, gazing at her with sorrowful eyes. But before she could grasp him, another wave rolled forth and dragged him down again. Twice more, the dream led her to the wise woman, who gave her first a golden flute, then a golden spinning wheel. Twice more she obeyed, and twice more her husband rose, first half his body, then at last his whole form. With the wheels offering, he leapt ashore and clasped her hand. Together they fled. But the pond roared in fury, and a flood pursued them across the land. Death seemed certain. In terror, the woman called upon the old woman for aid, and at once they were changed. She into a toad, he into a frog. Thus the flood could not destroy them, yet it bore them far apart. When at last they regained human shape upon dry land, each was lost in a strange country, not knowing where the other had been carried. Mountains and valleys divided them. To earn their bread, they both tended sheep for many weary years, hearts heavy with longing. At length, one spring day, chance brought their flocks together in a green valley. They did not know each other, yet they rejoiced in companionship, and thereafter met daily. Few words passed between them, but comfort grew in silence. One night, beneath the full moon, the shepherd took from his pocket a flute and played a mournful tune. At its sound, the shepherdess wept bitterly. "Why dost thou weep?" he asked. "Alas," she answered, "this very air I once played beside the pond when the head of my dearest rose from the water." At that moment, his eyes opened as though a veil had been lifted, and he knew her. The moon shone upon his face, and she recognized him also. With cries of joy, they fell into each other's arms, and no one need ask if they were happy ever after. The Nail. Once, in days not too near and not too far, there lived a merchant who was well known in many towns for his sharp mind, quick bargaining, and honest waits. He would travel from fair to fair, across valleys and rivers, through thick forests and open plains, and wherever he spread out his cloth and displayed his wares, people gathered round. For he dealt not in trifles only, but in sturdy goods, in shining tools, and in silks that shimmered like water at sunset. And so, at the great fair which was held once a year, he prospered more than ever before. From morning until evening, the customers came, and by the time the bells of the town rang the closing hour, his purse bulged with gold and silver. His eyes sparkled, for he thought of his home, of his wife waiting by the hearth, of his children who would leap to see the coins he brought, and of the fine supper he might enjoy before night had fallen. When all was sold and the stall was cleared, the merchant packed his trunk with the money, tied it fast upon his horse, and mounted. "If fortune is kind, I shall sleep under my own roof tonight," he said, urging his beast along the road. The sun climbed high, and the miles passed swiftly under hoof. At noon, he came to a small town, where he watered and fed the horse, and himself took bread and ale in the inn. When he was ready to ride again, the stable boy led the animal forth and said with a bow, "Good sir, a nail is missing in the shoe of the left hind foot." "Let it be missing," replied the merchant, impatient and eager to be gone. "The shoe will hold well enough for the 6 miles that still lie before me. I am in haste." And with that, he tossed the boy a coin, sprang into the saddle, and rode out without another thought. The day wore on. The road wound through wood and meadow, and the merchant pressed his horse steadily. By mid-afternoon, he came to another inn, where he thought to give the beast some rest and grain. Again, a stable boy looked over the horse and came into the room with a troubled face. "Sir," said he, "the shoe of the left hind foot is gone entirely. Shall I take him at once to the blacksmith who can fasten a new one?" "Let it still be wanting," answered the merchant with a wave of his hand. "It is but 2 miles farther, and my horse can well endure so little. I must not tarry. I long for my bed and my hearth." So he mounted again and set off. But scarcely had the town fallen behind him when the horse began to limp, slow at first, then heavy. Soon it stumbled upon the stones. The merchant urged it on, but the stumbling grew worse. Then, with a sharp cry, the beast fell, and the sound of breaking bone was plain. The poor animal lay in the dust, its leg broken beyond all hope of mending. Now the merchant's heart sank, for the horse could go no further, and the trunk of money was heavy as stone. He loosed the straps, lifted the burden upon his own shoulders, and began the weary walk homeward. The sky grew dim, the woods grew dark, the owls called, and the path seemed longer with every step. His back ached beneath the weight, his feet stumbled in the ruts, and many a time he feared that thieves would spring from the shadows to take both trunk and life. Yet he trudged on until at last, very late in the night, he reached his house. His wife ran out with a lantern. His children cried with joy. But he sank upon the bench, groaning, "That unlucky nail has brought me all this disaster." And so it was. For had he taken a moment's patience, had he listened to the stable boys, his horse would have been sound, his journey easy, and his arrival timely. But because he hurried, he found delay. Because he despised a small care, he suffered a great misfortune. Thus the tale is told, and thus the lesson is plain. Hasten slowly, for a single missing nail may overturn the journey of a day. The nail. Once, in days not too near and not too far, there lived a merchant who was well known in many towns for his sharp mind, quick bargaining, and honest weights. He would travel from fair to fair, across valleys and rivers, through thick forests and open plains, and wherever he spread out his cloth and displayed his wares, people gathered round. For he dealt not in trifles only, but in sturdy goods, in shining tools, and in silks that shimmered like water at sunset. And so, at the great fair which was held once a year, he prospered more than ever before. From morning until evening, the customers came, and by the time the bells of the town rang the closing hour, his purse bulged with gold and silver. His eyes sparkled, for he thought of his home, of his wife waiting by the hearth, of his children who would leap to see the coins he brought, and of the fine supper he might enjoy before night had fallen. When all was sold and the stall was cleared, the merchant packed his trunk with the money, tied it fast upon his horse, and mounted. "If fortune is kind, I shall sleep under my own roof tonight," he said, urging his beast along the road. The sun climbed high, and the miles passed swiftly under hoof. At noon, he came to a small town where he watered and fed the horse, and himself took bread and ale in the inn. When he was ready to ride again, the stable boy led the animal forth and said with a bow, "Good sir, a nail is missing in the shoe of the left hind foot." "Let it be missing," replied the merchant, impatient and eager to be gone. "The shoe will hold well enough for the 6 miles that still lie before me. I am in haste." And with that, he tossed the boy a coin, sprang into the saddle, and rode out without another thought. The day wore on. The road wound through wood and meadow, and the merchant pressed his horse. Steadily, by mid-afternoon, he came to another inn, where he thought to give the beast some rest and grain. Again, a stable boy looked over the horse and came into the room with a troubled face. "Sir," said he, "the shoe of the left hind foot is gone entirely. Shall I take him at once to the blacksmith, who can fasten a new one?" "Let it still be wanting," answered the merchant with a wave of his hand. "It is but 2 miles farther, and my horse can well endure so little. I must not tarry. I long for my bed and my hearth." So he mounted again and set off. But scarcely had the town fallen behind him when the horse began to limp, slow at first, then heavy. Soon it stumbled upon the stones. The merchant urged it on, but the stumbling grew worse. Then, with a sharp cry, the beast fell, and the sound of breaking bone was plain. The poor animal lay in the dust, its leg broken beyond all hope of mending. Now the merchant's heart sank, for the horse could go no further, and the trunk of money was heavy as stone. He loosed the straps, lifted the burden upon his own shoulders, and began the weary walk homeward. The sky grew dim, the woods grew dark, the owls called, and the path seemed longer with every step. His back ached beneath the weight, his feet stumbled in the ruts, and many a time he feared that thieves would spring from the shadows to take both trunk and life. Yet he trudged on, until at last, very late in the night, he reached his house. His wife ran out with a lantern. His children cried with joy, but he sank upon the bench, groaning, "That unlucky nail has brought me all this disaster." And so it was. For had he taken a moment's patience, had he listened to the stable boys, his horse would have been sound, his journey easy, and his arrival timely. But because he hurried, he found delay. Because he despised a small care, he suffered a great misfortune. Thus the tale is told, and thus the lesson is plain. Hasten slowly, for a single missing nail may overturn the journey of a day. The Hare and the Hedgehog. This story, my dear young folks, seems to be false, but it really is true, for my grandfather, from whom I have it, used always, when relating it, to say complacently, "It must be true, my son, or else no one could tell it to you." The story is as follows. One Sunday morning, about harvest time, just as the buckwheat was in bloom, the sun was shining brightly in heaven. The east wind was blowing warmly over the stubble fields. The larks were singing in the air, the bees buzzing among the buckwheat. The people were all going in their Sunday clothes to church, and all creatures were happy, and the hedgehog was happy too. The hedgehog, however, was standing by his door with his arms akimbo, enjoying the morning breezes, and slowly trilling a little song to himself, which was neither better nor worse than the songs which hedgehogs are in the habit of singing on a blessed Sunday morning. Whilst he was thus singing half aloud to himself, it suddenly occurred to him that while his wife was washing and drying the children, he might very well take a walk into the field and see how his turnips were going on. The turnips were, in fact, close beside his house, and he and his family were accustomed to eat them, for which reason he looked upon them as his own. No sooner said than done. The hedgehog shut the house door behind him and took the path to the field. He had not gone very far from home, and was just turning round the sloe bush which stands there outside the field to go up into the turnip field, when he observed the hare who had gone out on business of the same kind, namely, to visit his cabbages. When the hedgehog caught sight of the hare, he bade him a friendly good morning, but the hare, who was in his own way a distinguished gentleman and frightfully haughty, did not return the hedgehog's greeting, but said to him, assuming at the same time a very contemptuous manner, "How do you happen to be running about here in the field so early in the morning?" "I am taking a walk," said the hedgehog. "A walk," said the hare with a smile. "It seems to me that you might use your legs for a better purpose." This answer made the hedgehog furiously angry, for he can bear anything but an attack on his legs, just because they are crooked by nature. So now the hedgehog said to the hare, "You seem to imagine that you can do more with your legs than I with mine." "That is just what I do think," said the hare. "That can be put to the test," said the hedgehog. "I wager that if we run a race, I will outstrip you." "That is ridiculous. You with your short legs," said the hare. "But for my part, I am willing. If you have such a monstrous fancy for it, what shall we wager?" "A golden louis d'or and a bottle of brandy," said the hedgehog. "Done," said the hare. "Shake hands on it, and then we may as well come off at once." "Nay," said the hedgehog, "there is no such great hurry. I am still fasting. I will go home first and have a little breakfast. In half an hour, I will be back again at this place." Hereupon the hedgehog departed, for the hare was quite satisfied with this. On his way, the hedgehog thought to himself, "The hare relies on his long legs, but I will contrive to get the better of him. He may be a great man, but he is a very silly fellow, and he shall pay for what he has said." So when the hedgehog reached home, he said to his wife, "Wife, dress thyself quickly. Thou must go out to the field with me." "What is going on, then?" said his wife. "I have made a wager with the hare for a gold louis d'or and a bottle of brandy. I am to run a race with him, and thou must be present." "Good heavens, husband," the wife now cried. "Art thou not right in thy mind? Hast thou completely lost thy wits? What can make thee want to run a race with the hare?" "Hold thy tongue, woman," said the hedgehog. "That is my affair. Don't begin to discuss things which are matters for men. Be off, dress thyself, and come with me." What could the hedgehog's wife do? She was forced to obey him, whether she liked it or not. So when they had set out on their way together, the hedgehog said to his wife, "Now pay attention to what I am going to say. Look you, I will make the long field our race course. The hare shall run in one furrow, and I in another, and we will begin to run from the top. Now all that thou hast to do is to place thyself here below in the furrow. And when the hare arrives at the end of the furrow, on the other side of thee, thou must cry out to him, 'I am here already.'" Then they reached the field, and the hedgehog showed his wife her place, and then walked up the field. When he reached the top, the hare was already there. "Shall we start?" said the hare. "Certainly," said the hedgehog. Then both at once. So saying, each placed himself in his own furrow. The hare counted once, twice, thrice, and away, and went off like a whirlwind down the field. The hedgehog, however, only ran about 3 paces, and then he stooped down in the furrow and stayed quietly where he was. When the hare therefore arrived in full career at the lower end of the field, the hedgehog's wife met him with the cry, "I am here already." The hare was shocked and wondered not a little. He thought no other than that it was the hedgehog himself who was calling to him. For the hedgehog's wife looked just like her husband. The hare, however, thought to himself, "That has not been done fairly," and cried, "It must be run again. Let us have it again." And once more he went off like the wind in a storm, so that he seemed to fly. But the hedgehog's wife stayed quietly in her place. So when the hare reached the top of the field, the hedgehog himself cried out to him, "I am here already." The hare, however, quite beside himself with anger, cried, "It must be run again. We must have it again." "All right," answered the hedgehog. "For my part, we'll run as often as you choose." So the hare ran 73 times more, and the hedgehog always held out against him. And every time the hare reached either the top or the bottom, either the hedgehog or his wife said, "I am here already." At the 74th time, however, the hare could no longer reach the end. In the middle of the field, he fell to the ground. Blood streamed out of his mouth, and he lay dead on the spot. But the hedgehog took the louis d'or, which he had won, and the bottle of brandy, called his wife out of the furrow, and both went home together in great delight. And if they are not dead, they are living there still. This is how it happened that the hedgehog made the hare run races with him on the Buxtehude Heath till he died. And since that time, no hare has ever had any fancy for running races with a Buxtehude hedgehog. The moral of this story, however, is, firstly, that no one, however great he may be, should permit himself to jest at anyone beneath him, even if he be only a hedgehog. And secondly, it teaches that when a man marries, he should take a wife in his own position, who looks just as he himself looks. So, whosoever is a hedgehog, let him see to it that his wife is a hedgehog also, and so forth. The Peasant and the Devil. Once upon a time, in a village hemmed in by dark forests and wide meadows, there lived a peasant of uncommon sharpness. His eyes were keen as a hawk's, and his mind turned quicker than the wheel of a mill stream. Folks in the tavern whispered often of his cunning ways, and it was said that no bargain, however tricky, could ever make a fool of him. Yet of all the tales told about this man, the most wondrous is the one of how he outwitted the devil himself. It happened one autumn evening, when the peasant had been laboring in his field from dawn until twilight. His hands were blackened with soil, and his back ached from bending over the stubborn earth. As the sun sank and shadows stretched long, he gathered his tools and prepared to walk home. But lo, in the very heart of his field, he saw a strange glow, a red shimmer, as though a fire smoldered without wood. Startled, he drew nearer, and there before him lay a heap of burning coals, and upon those coals sat a small black figure, twisted of limb, with eyes like embers and horns that curled like a goat's. It was the devil in person, no taller than a child, yet terrible to behold. "By my faith," cried the peasant, forcing courage into his voice, "thou dost indeed sit upon a treasure." "A treasure it is," said the little black one, with a grin that showed teeth sharp as sickle blades. "Beneath me lies more gold and silver than ever thou hast seen in thy days. It is enough to make thee lord of this whole valley." "The treasure lies in my ground," answered the peasant boldly, "and by right it belongs to me." "Thine it shall be," replied the devil, "if only thou wilt grant me my desire. For 2 years give me the half of all that thy field brings forth. Money I have in plenty, but I crave the fruits of the earth, fresh and green, which I cannot fashion in my fiery home." Now the peasant, though poor, was not greedy enough to leap blindly. He stroked his beard and pretended to weigh the matter, but already his mind was spinning with trickery. "So be it," said he at last, "but that no quarrel may arise between us, let us strike the bargain plain. All that grows above the earth shall be thine, and all that swells beneath the soil shall be mine." The devil, believing himself clever, smote his hands together. "Done," he cried, and vanished in a puff of sparks. The peasant went to his hut and laughed until the rafters shook, for he had sown not wheat nor barley, but turnips, thick and heavy. When the season turned and harvest drew near, the devil returned, his step leaving scorched prints upon the soil. He strutted to the field, eager to gather his share, yet found naught but the broad yellow leaves of the turnips, limp and bitter. Meanwhile, the peasant, with great delight, dug up the fat roots that glowed like gold in the setting sun. "Thou hast outwitted me this once," snarled the devil, his tail lashing like a whip. "But next year the bargain shall be reversed. What grows beneath the soil is thine, but what rises above it shall be mine." The peasant bowed with false meekness. "As thou wilt," said he. But in his mind he already laid new plans. When spring came round again, he sowed not turnips, but golden wheat. The stalks grew tall, their heads heavy with grain, swaying like waves in the summer wind. When harvest came, the peasant took his sickle and cut the stalks close to the ground, bundling sheaves until his barn was bursting. The devil, grinning with expectation, strode once more into the field. But lo, there was nothing left for him but the stubble, dry and useless, while all the bounty had gone to the peasant's store. At this, the devil shrieked with fury. Flames burst from his nostrils, and the earth cracked beneath his feet. Down into a cleft of the rocks he leapt, howling, and vanished into the deep places of the world. The peasant stood laughing over his sheaves, the gold of the wheat gleaming brighter than any coin. Then he took his spade went to the place where the burning coals had first glowed and unearthed the devil's treasure. He filled his cart with silver and gold until the axles groaned, and drove it home with a song upon his lips. And so the crafty peasant grew rich beyond measure, while the devil was left tricked and mocked. To this day, when folk speak of cleverness, they say, that is the way to cheat the devil. The Master Thief. One day, an old man and his wife were sitting in front of a miserable house, resting a while from their work. Suddenly, a splendid carriage with 4 black horses came driving up, and a richly dressed man descended from it. The peasant stood up, went to the great man, and asked what he wanted, and in what way he could be useful to him. The stranger stretched out his hand to the old man and said, I want nothing but to enjoy for once a country dish. Cook me some potatoes in the way you always have them, and then I will sit down at your table and eat them with pleasure. The peasant smiled and said, You are a count, or a prince, or perhaps even a duke. Noble gentlemen often have such fancies, but you shall have your wish. The wife went into the kitchen and began to wash and rub the potatoes and to make them into balls, as they are eaten by the country folks. Whilst she was busy with this work, the peasant said to the stranger, Come into my garden with me for a while. I have still something to do there. He had dug some holes in the garden and now wanted to plant some trees in them. Have you no children? Asked the stranger, who could help you with your work? No, answered the peasant. I had a son, it is true, but it is long since he went out into the world. He was a ne'er-do-well, sharp and knowing, but he would learn nothing and was full of bad tricks. At last, he ran away from me, and since then, I have heard nothing of him. The old man took a young tree, put it in a hole, drove in a post beside it, and when he had shoveled in some earth and had trampled it firmly down, he tied the stem of the tree above, below, and in the middle, fast to the post by a rope of straw. But tell me, said the stranger, why you don't tie that crooked, knotted tree, which is lying in the corner there, bent down almost to the ground, to a post also, that it may grow straight, as well as these? The old man smiled and said, Sir, you speak according to your knowledge. It is easy to see that you are not familiar with gardening. That tree there is old and misshapen. No one can make it straight now. Trees must be trained while they are young. That is how it was with your son, said the stranger. If you had trained him while he was still young, he would not have run away. Now he too must have grown hard and misshapen. Truly, it is a long time since he went away, replied the old man. He must have changed, "Would you know him again if he were to come to you?" asked the stranger. "Hardly by his face," replied the peasant, "but he has a mark about him, a birthmark on his shoulder that looks like a bean." When he had said that, the stranger pulled off his coat, bared his shoulder, and showed the peasant the bean. "Good God!" cried the old man. "Thou art really my son." And love for his child stirred in his heart. "But," he added, "how canst thou be my son? Thou hast become a great lord, and livest in wealth and luxury. How hast thou contrived to do that?" "Ah, father," answered the son, "the young tree was bound to no post and has grown crooked. Now it is too old. It will never be straight again. How have I got all that? I have become a thief. But do not be alarmed. I am a master thief. For me there are neither locks nor bolts. Whatsoever I desire is mine. Do not imagine that I steal like a common thief. I only take some of the superfluity of the rich. Poor people are safe. I would rather give to them than take anything from them. It is the same with anything which I can have without trouble. Cunning and dexterity, I never touch it." "Alas, my son," said the father, "it still does not please me. A thief is still a thief. I tell thee, it will end badly." He took him to his mother, and when she heard that was her son, she wept for joy. But when he told her that he had become a master thief, 2 streams flowed down over her face. At length she said, "Even if he has become a thief, he is still my son, and my eyes have beheld him once more." They sat down to table, and once again he ate with his parents the wretched food which he had not eaten for so long. The father said, "If our lord, the count up there in the castle, learns who thou art, and what trade thou followest, he will not take thee in his arms and cradle thee in them, as he did when he held thee at the font, but will cause thee to swing from a halter. Be easy, father, he will do me no harm, for I understand my trade. I will go to him myself this very day." When evening drew near, the master thief seated himself in his carriage and drove to the castle. The count received him civilly, for he took him for a distinguished man. When, however, the stranger made himself known, the count turned pale and was quite silent for some time. At length he said, "Thou art my godson, and on that account mercy shall take the place of justice, and I will deal leniently with thee. Since thou pridest thyself on being a master thief, I will put thy art to the proof. But if thou dost not stand the test, thou must marry the rope-maker's daughter, and the croaking of the raven must be thy music on the occasion." "Lord Count," answered the master thief, "think of 3 things, as difficult as you like, and if I do not perform your tasks, do with me what you will." The Count reflected for some minutes, and then said, "Well then, in the first place, thou shalt steal the horse I keep for my own riding out of the stable. In the next, thou shalt steal the sheet from beneath the bodies of my wife and myself when we are asleep, without our observing it, and the wedding ring of my wife as well. Thirdly, and lastly, thou shalt steal away out of the church the parson and clerk. Mark what I am saying, for thy life depends on it." The master thief went to the nearest town. There he bought the clothes of an old peasant woman and put them on. Then he stained his face brown and painted wrinkles on it as well, so that no one could have recognized him. Then he filled a small cask with old Hungary wine, in which was mixed a powerful sleeping drink. He put the cask in a basket, which he took on his back, and walked with slow and tottering steps to the Count's castle. It was already dark when he arrived. He sat down on a stone in the courtyard and began to cough like an asthmatic old woman, and to rub his hands as if he were cold. In front of the door of the stable, some soldiers were lying round a fire. One of them observed the woman and called out to her, "Come nearer, old mother, and warm thyself beside us. After all, thou hast no bed for the night, and must take one where thou canst find it." The old woman tottered up to them, begged them to lift the basket from her back, and sat down beside them at the fire. "What hast thou got in thy little cask, old lady?" asked one. "A good mouthful of wine," she answered. "I live by trade. For money and fair words, I am quite ready to let you have a glass." "Let us have it here then," said the soldier. And when he had tasted one glass, he said, "When wine is good, I like another glass," and had another poured out for himself, and the rest followed his example. "Hallo, comrades," cried one of them to those who were in the stable. "Here is an old goody who has wine that is as old as herself. Take a draught. It will warm your stomachs far better than our fire." The old woman carried her cask into the stable. One of the soldiers had seated himself on the saddled riding horse. Another held its bridle in his hand. A third had laid hold of its tail. She poured out as much as they wanted until the spring ran dry. It was not long before the bridle fell from the hand of the one, and he fell down and began to snore. The other left hold of the tail, lay down, and snored still louder. The one who was sitting in the saddle did remain sitting, but bent his head almost down to the horse's neck, and slept and blew with his mouth like the bellows of a forge. The soldiers outside had already been asleep for a long time, and were lying on the ground motionless, as if dead. When the master thief saw that he had succeeded, he gave the first a rope in his hand instead of the bridle, and the other, who had been holding the tail, a wisp of straw. But what was he to do with the one who was sitting on the horse's back? He did not want to throw him down, for he might have awakened and have uttered a cry. He had a good idea. He unbuckled the girths of the saddle, tied a couple of ropes, which were hanging to a ring on the wall, fast to the saddle, and drew the sleeping rider up into the air on it. Then he twisted the rope round the posts and made it fast. He soon unloosed the horse from the chain, but if he had ridden over the stony pavement of the yard, they would have heard the noise in the castle. So he wrapped the horse's hoofs in old rags, led him carefully out, leapt upon him, and galloped off. When day broke, the master galloped to the castle on the stolen horse. The count had just got up and was looking out of the window. "Good morning, Sir Count," he cried to him. "Here is the horse, which I have got safely out of the stable. Just look, how beautifully your soldiers are lying there sleeping. And if you will but go into the stable, you will see how comfortable your watchers have made it for themselves." The Count could not help laughing. Then he said, "For once thou hast succeeded, but things won't go so well the second time. And I warn thee that if thou comest before me as a thief, I will handle thee as I would a thief." When the Countess went to bed that night, she closed her hand with the wedding ring tightly together, and the Count said, "All the doors are locked and bolted. I will keep awake and wait for the thief. But if he gets in by the window, I will shoot him." The master thief, however, went in the dark to the gallows, cut a poor sinner who was hanging there down from the halter, and carried him on his back to the castle. Then he set a ladder up to the bedroom, put the dead body on his shoulders, and began to climb up. When he had got so high that the head of the dead man showed at the window, the Count, who was watching in his bed, fired a pistol at him, and immediately the master let the poor sinner fall down and hid himself in one corner. The night was sufficiently lighted by the moon for the master to see distinctly how the Count got out of the window onto the ladder, came down, carried the dead body into the garden, and began to dig a hole in which to lay it. "Now," thought the thief, "the favorable moment has come," stole nimbly out of his corner, and climbed up the ladder straight into the Countess's bedroom. "Dear wife," he began in the Count's voice, "the thief is dead, but after all, he is my godson, and has been more of a scapegrace than a villain. I will not put him to open shame. Besides, I am sorry for the parents. I will bury him myself before daybreak, in the garden that the thing may not be known. So give me the sheet. I will wrap up the body in it, and bury him as a dog buries things by scratching." The Countess gave him the sheet. "I tell you what," continued the thief, "I have a fit of magnanimity on me. Give me the ring, too. The unhappy man risked his life for it, so he may take it with him into his grave." She would not gainsay the Count, and although she did it unwillingly, she drew the ring from her finger and gave it to him. The thief made off with both these things and reached home safely before the Count in the garden had finished his work of burying. What a long face the Count did pull when the master came next morning and brought him the sheet and the ring. "Art thou a wizard?" said he. "Who has fetched thee out of the grave in which I myself laid thee, and brought thee to life again?" "You did not bury me," said the thief, "but the poor sinner on the gallows." And he told him exactly how everything had happened, and the Count was forced to own to him that he was a clever, crafty thief. "But thou hast not reached the end yet," he added. "Thou hast still to perform the third task, and if thou dost not succeed in that, all is of no use." The master smiled and returned no answer. When night had fallen, he went with a long sack on his back, a bundle under his arms, and a lantern in his hand to the village church. In the sack he had some crabs, and in the bundle short wax candles. He sat down in the churchyard, took out a crab, and stuck a wax candle on his back. Then he lighted the little light, put the crab on the ground, and let it creep about. He took a second out of the sack and treated it in the same way, and so on, until the last was out of the sack. Hereupon, he put on a long black garment that looked like a monk's cowl, and stuck a gray beard on his chin. When at last he was quite unrecognizable, he took the sack in which the crabs had been, went into the church, and ascended the pulpit. The clock in the tower was just striking 12. When the last stroke had sounded, he cried with a loud and piercing voice, "Hearken, sinful men! The end of all things has come. The last day is at hand. Hearken, hearken! Whosoever wishes to go to heaven with me must creep into the sack. I am Peter, who opens and shuts the gate of heaven. Behold how the dead outside, there in the churchyard, are wandering about, collecting their bones. Come, come, and creep into the sack. The world is about to be destroyed." The cry echoed through the whole village. The parson and clerk, who lived nearest to the church, heard it first. And when they saw the lights which were moving about the churchyard, they observed that something unusual was going on, and went into the church. They listened to the sermon for a while, and then the clerk nudged the parson and said, "It would not be amiss if we were to use the opportunity together, and before the dawning of the last day, find an easy way of getting to heaven." "To tell the truth," answered the parson, That is what I myself have been thinking, so if you are inclined, we will set out on our way." "Yes," answered the clerk, "but you, the pastor, have the precedence. I will follow." So the parson went first, and ascended the pulpit where the master opened his sack. The parson crept in first, and then the clerk. The master immediately tied up the sack tightly, seized it by the middle, and dragged it down the pulpit steps. And whenever the heads of the two fools bumped against the steps, he cried, "We are going over the mountains." Then he drew them through the village in the same way, and when they were passing through puddles, he cried, "Now we are going through wet clouds." And when at last he was dragging them up the steps of the castle, he cried, "Now we are on the steps of heaven, and will soon be in the outer court." When he had got to the top, he pushed the sack into the pigeon house, and when the pigeons fluttered about, he said, "Hark, how glad the angels are, and how they are flapping their wings." Then he bolted the door upon them and went away. Next morning he went to the count and told him that he had performed the third task also, and had carried the parson and clerk out of the church. "Where hast thou left them?" asked the Lord. "They are lying upstairs in a sack in the pigeon house, and imagine that they are in heaven." The count went up himself and convinced himself that the master had told the truth. When he had delivered the parson and clerk from their captivity, he said, "Thou art an arch-thief, and hast won thy wager. For once thou escapest with a whole skin, but see that thou leavest my land. For if ever thou settest foot on it again, thou mayst count on thy elevation to the gallows." The arch-thief took leave of his parents, once more went forth into the wide world, and no one has ever heard of him since. The ear of corn. In the olden days, when the Almighty still walked among men with his own feet upon the soil of the earth, the blessings of the land were greater than tongue can tell. The soil was so rich that a single grain would bring forth hundreds, and the fields waved with ears so heavy that a man could scarce carry but a few in his arms. Then the stalks of corn bore ears from the root all the way up to the very tip. And according to the height of the stalk was also the greatness of the ear. So it was that the land yielded plenty, and men wanted for nothing, if only they gave thanks for the gifts of heaven. But men are fashioned with hearts that change swiftly, and when fortune smiles too generously upon them, they soon forget to honor the hand that gives. Instead of gratitude, there comes carelessness, and instead of reverence, there grows arrogance. They tread lightly upon sacred things as though they had sprung from their own strength and not from the mercy of God. It happened once, on a day when the sun shone bright and the ears of corn glittered like golden spears, that a woman walked along the edge of such a field. By her side ran her small child, full of laughter and heedless play. The ground was soft, for rain had fallen in the night, and little pools of water still lay upon the path. The child, in his frolic, slipped and tumbled into a muddy puddle, so that his frock was dirtied and stained. The mother, vexed and not thinking what she did, seized a handful of the shining ears of corn, and as though they were no better than rags, she rubbed the garment of the child until the stains were gone. Thus she used the heavenly gift, meant for the nourishment of men and beasts, for no higher purpose than to wipe away mud. Now it so happened that the Lord himself came walking down that same way, for in those times he still dwelt among the children of men, and beheld with his own eyes how they lived. When he saw how the woman treated the corn, his countenance grew stern, and he spoke with a voice that rolled like thunder across the plain. From this day forth shall the stalks of corn bear no more ears from the root to the crown. Men are no longer worthy of so great a blessing. They have forgotten reverence. They have grown proud and careless with the gifts of heaven. Therefore shall the abundance be taken away, and the plenty shall be made small. Those who stood nearby, laborers and wanderers in the field, trembled at the words. Their knees grew weak, and they fell to the ground, for they feared the judgment of the Lord. And they cried out with humble voices, O Lord, though men have sinned and proved unworthy, have mercy upon the innocent creatures of the air. If all the ears be stripped from the stalk, then the birds who live upon thy bounty will surely starve, for they know not how to sow nor reap, and have none to care for them, save thee alone. Spare, we pray thee, some portion, though small, that the sparrows and larks and all the winged folk may still find their bread. The Lord, who sees all things and knows the sorrow of even the least of his creatures, looked upon them with compassion. He foresaw the hunger of the little birds, how they would search in vain for seeds upon the earth, and he pitied them. So he stayed his wrath, and he spoke again. For the sake of the innocent, I will not utterly destroy the gift. No longer shall the stalks be laden from root to crown, but at the top I will leave ears as a token of my mercy. And so long as men walk the earth, there shall be food enough for bird and beast, though not the overflowing plenty that once was. Thus it came to pass that the ears of corn were shortened, and the earth no longer yielded 400-fold, but only 50 or 60, and oftentimes less. And men learned, though slowly, that blessings despised are blessings lost, and that he who scorns the hand of heaven shall one day feel its withdrawal. Yet the birds, who sing each morning and take neither thought for sowing nor reaping, still find their portion upon the stalks, for the Lord in his mercy remembered them. And that is why, to this very day, the corn grows only at the tops of the stalks, and why the fields do not give as richly as they did when God still walked openly among men. Old Rinkrank. Once upon a time there lived a mighty king, stern in his decrees and proud in his heart, who had but one daughter, a maiden of rare beauty and gentle spirit. In his kingdom there was much talk of suitors, for many young princes and noblemen longed to win her hand. Yet the king, desiring that none but the bravest and most steadfast should gain her, caused a strange and perilous thing to be built. He commanded that a mountain of purest glass be fashioned, smooth and steep, so shining that the sun itself was dazzled when it struck its sides. And the king proclaimed throughout his realm that whosoever should climb the glass mountain and cross to the far side without stumbling or falling should have his daughter as bride. Among those who heard the decree was a young man, poor in fortune but rich in courage, who loved the king's daughter dearly. He went before the king and begged leave to attempt the trial. "Yes," said the king, "if you can cross the mountain without falling, the maiden shall be yours." And the princess, who in secret loved the youth as well, whispered that she would go with him upon the treacherous path. "If you stumble," she said, "I will hold you fast, and together we shall not fall." So the two set forth hand in hand, climbing the glittering slope that was slippery as ice and sharp as crystal knives. They toiled upward, the sun blazing upon the glass so that their eyes were half blinded, yet still they pressed on. But when they were halfway to the summit, misfortune befell them. The princess, whose foot was small and delicate, slipped upon the smooth surface. She gave a cry, and in that moment, the glass mountain yawned open like a mouth, swallowed her down into its depths, and closed again as swiftly as it had parted. Her betrothed reached for her, but his hand closed upon empty air. She was gone, hidden within the proud heart of the mountain, and no eye could see where she had fallen. The youth wept bitterly, and the king himself was struck with grief. He commanded his men to break open the mountain with hammers and picks of iron. But though they labored long, no trace of the princess could they find. The mountain stood whole and gleaming as before, mocking their efforts. And so sorrow dwelt in the palace, and the kingdom was filled with lamentation. Meanwhile, the poor princess had fallen deep, deep into the earth and found herself in a vast cavern where no daylight entered. There came toward her a strange and frightful old man with a beard as long and gray as winter frost, trailing upon the ground before him. His eyes were sharp as gimlets, and his voice was harsh as stone upon stone. "You shall be my servant," said he, "and do all that I command. If you obey, you may live. If not, I will kill you without pity." Fearing death, the maiden bowed her head and submitted. Each morning, the old man drew from his pocket a little ladder of wondrous make, set it against the wall of the mountain, and climbed to the upper world. When he was gone, he pulled the ladder after him, so that she could not escape. Then the princess must remain alone in the cavern, cooking his food, washing his dishes, making his bed, and ordering all things to his liking. At night he returned, bringing with him heaps of gold and silver, which he cast carelessly upon the floor, as though they were no more than stones. Thus passed the years, until the fair princess grew old and weary. Her youth withered away in bondage. The old man called her Mother Mansrot, and she was forced to call him by the name of Old Rinkrank. Now it happened one day, after many, many years, that old Rinkrank went forth as was his wont, leaving her in the cavern. She made his bed, washed his dishes, and set all in order. But when her work was finished, a thought of freedom stirred within her heart. She barred the door, shuttered the windows tight, save for one small casement through which a single shaft of light entered. This she left open. When old Rinkrank returned, he knocked and cried in his harsh voice, "Mother Mansrot, open the door for me." But she answered, "No, old Rinkrank, I will not open the door." Then he began to chant, "Here stand I, poor Rinkrank, on my 17 long shanks, on my weary, worn-out foot, wash my dishes, Mother Mansrot." "I have washed thy dishes already," she replied. Again he sang, "Here stand I, poor Rinkrank, on my 17 long shanks, on my weary, worn-out foot. Make me my bed, Mother Mansrot." "I have made thy bed already," said she. Once more he cried, "Here stand I, poor Rinkrank, on my 17 long shanks, on my weary, worn-out foot. Open the door, Mother Mansrot." Still she would not obey. Then old Rinkrank ran around the house in rage, and at last he spied the little window that stood open. "Ha," thought he, "I will peer in and see what this disobedient woman is about." He tried to thrust in his head, but his beard was so long and tangled that it hindered him. So he pushed the beard through first, strand upon strand, until half of it lay within. At that moment, Mother Mansrot, who had fastened a strong cord to the casement, pulled it suddenly down, and the window clamped tight upon his beard. Then old Rinkrank began to howl most piteously, for the pain was great. He begged her to release him. "Not until," said she, "you give me the ladder by which you climb the mountain." Whether he wished it or not, he was forced to reveal where it was hidden. She found it, fastened a long ribbon to the window so that his beard should remain caught, and set up the ladder against the mountain wall. With quick steps she climbed, higher and higher, until at last she reached the open air once more. She hastened to her father's palace, and there told the king all that had befallen her through those many sorrowful years. Great was his joy, and her betrothed, who had never ceased to mourn her, was still waiting in grief but hope. Together they went with the king's men to the mountain, and there they dug deep until they found old Rinkrank trapped within, sitting among his piles of gold and silver. The king commanded that the wicked old man be put to death, and all his treasures were seized for the crown. Afterwards, the princess was at last wed to her faithful betrothed, and the whole land rejoiced with feasting and music. Long and happily they lived, in honor, magnificence, and joy, while the tale of old Rinkrank and the glass mountain was told by firesides for many a year. The Crystal Ball. There was once an enchantress who had 3 sons who loved each other as brothers. But the old woman did not trust them and thought they wanted to steal her power from her. So she changed the eldest into an eagle, which was forced to dwell in the Rocky Mountains, and was often seen sweeping in great circles in the sky. The second she changed into a whale, which lived in the deep sea. And all that was seen of it was that it sometimes spouted up a great jet of water in the air. Each of them only bore his human form for only 2 hours daily. The third son, who was afraid she might change him into a raging wild beast, a bear perhaps, or a wolf, went secretly away. He had heard that a king's daughter, who was bewitched, was imprisoned in the castle of the Golden Sun and was waiting for deliverance. Those, however, who tried to free her risked their lives. 23 youths had already died a miserable death, and now only one other might make the attempt, after which no more must come. And as his heart was without fear, he caught at the idea of seeking out the castle of the Golden Sun. He had already traveled about for a long time without being able to find it, when he came by chance into a great forest and did not know the way out of it. All at once, he saw in the distance 2 giants who made a sign to him with their hands. And when he came to them, they said, "We are quarreling about a cap, and which of us it is to belong to. And as we are equally strong, neither of us can get the better of the other. The small men are cleverer than we are, so we will leave the decision to thee." "How can you dispute about an old cap?" said the youth. "Thou dost not know what properties it has. It is a wishing cap. Whosoever puts it on can wish himself away wherever he likes, and in an instant he will be there." "Give me the cap," said the youth. "I will go a short distance off, and when I call you, you must run a race, and the cap shall belong to the one who gets first to me." He put it on and went away, and thought of the king's daughter, forgot the giants, and walked continually onward. At length, he sighed from the very bottom of his heart, and cried, "Ah, if I were but at the castle of the golden sun." And hardly had the words passed his lips than he was standing on a high mountain before the gate of the castle. He entered and went through all the rooms until in the last he found the king's daughter. But how shocked he was when he saw her. She had an ashen gray face full of wrinkles, blear eyes, and red hair. "Are you the king's daughter, whose beauty the whole world praises?" cried he. "Ah," she answered, "this is not my form. Human eyes can only see me in this state of ugliness. But that thou mayest know what I am like, look in the mirror. It does not let itself be misled. It will show thee my image, as it is in truth." She gave him the mirror in his hand, and he saw therein the likeness of the most beautiful maiden on earth, and saw, too, how the tears were rolling down her cheeks with grief. Then said he, "How canst thou be set free? I fear no danger." She said, "He who gets the crystal ball and holds it before the enchanter will destroy his power with it, and I shall resume my true shape." "Ah," she added, "so many have already gone to meet death for this, and thou art so young. I grieve that thou shouldst encounter such great danger." "Nothing can keep me from doing it," said he. "But tell me what I must do." "Thou shalt know everything," said the king's daughter. "When thou descendest the mountain on which the castle stands, a wild bull will stand below by a spring, and thou must fight with it. And if thou hast the luck to kill it, a fiery bird will spring out of it, which bears in its body a burning egg, and in the egg the crystal ball lies like a yolk. The bird will not, however, let the egg fall until forced to do so, and if it falls on the ground, it will flame up and burn everything that is near, and melt even ice itself, and with it the crystal ball. And then all thy trouble will have been in vain. The youth went down to the spring, where the bull snorted and bellowed at him. After a long struggle, he plunged his sword in the animal's body, and it fell down. Instantly, a fiery bird arose from it, and was about to fly away. But the young man's brother, the eagle, who was passing between the clouds, swooped down, hunted it away to the sea, and struck it with his beak until, in its extremity, it let the egg fall. The egg did not, however, fall into the sea, but on a fisherman's hut which stood on the shore, and the hut began at once to smoke, and was about to break out in flames. Then arose in the sea waves, as high as a house. They streamed over the hut, and subdued the fire. The other brother, the whale, had come swimming to them, and had driven the water up on high. When the fire was extinguished, the youth sought for the egg, and happily found it. It was not yet melted, but the shell was broken by being so suddenly cooled with the water, and he could take out the crystal ball unhurt. When the youth went to the enchanter and held it before him, the latter said, "My power is destroyed, and from this time forth thou art the king of the castle of the golden sun. With this canst thou likewise give back to thy brothers their human form." Then the youth hastened to the king's daughter, and when he entered the room, she was standing there in the full splendor of her beauty, and joyfully they exchanged rings with each other. Maid Maleen. There was once a king who had a son who asked in marriage the daughter of a mighty king. She was called Maid Maleen, and was beautiful. As her father wished to give her to another, the prince was rejected. But as they both loved each other with all their hearts, they would not give each other up. And Maid Maleen said to her father, "I can and will take no other for my husband." Then the king flew into a passion and ordered a dark tower to be built, into which no ray of sunlight or moonlight should enter. When it was finished, he said, "Therein shalt thou be imprisoned for 7 years, and then I will come and see if thy perverse spirit is broken." Meat and drink for the 7 years were carried into the tower, and then she and her waiting woman were led into it and walled up, and thus cut off from the sky and from the earth. There they sat in the darkness, and knew not when day or night began. The king's son often went round and round the tower and called their names, but no sound from without pierced through the thick walls. What else could they do but lament and complain? Meanwhile, the time passed, and by the diminution of the food and drink, they knew that the 7 years were coming to an end. They thought the moment of their deliverance was come, but no stroke of the hammer was heard. No stone fell out of the wall, and it seemed to Maid Maleen that her father had forgotten her. As they only had food for a short time longer, and saw a miserable death awaiting them, Maid Maleen said, "We must try our last chance and see if we can break through the wall." She took the bread knife and picked and bored at the mortar of a stone. And when she was tired, the waiting maid took her turn. With great labor, they succeeded in getting out one stone, and then a second, and a third. And when 3 days were over, the first ray of light fell on their darkness, and at last the opening was so large that they could look out. The sky was blue, and a fresh breeze played on their faces. But how melancholy everything looked all around. Her father's castle lay in ruins. The town and the villages were, so far as could be seen, destroyed by fire. The fields far and wide laid to waste, and no human being was visible. When the opening in the wall was large enough for them to slip through, the waiting maid sprang down first, and then Maid Maleen followed. But where were they to go? The enemy had ravaged the whole kingdom, driven away the king, and slain all the inhabitants. They wandered forth to seek another country, but nowhere did they find a shelter or a human being to give them a mouthful of bread. And their need was so great that they were forced to appease their hunger with nettles. When, after long journeying, they came into another country, they tried to get work everywhere, but wherever they knocked, they were turned away, and no one would have pity on them. At last they arrived in a large city and went to the royal palace. There also they were ordered to go away, but at last the cook said that they might stay in the kitchen and be scullions. The son of the king in whose kingdom they were was, however, the very man who had been betrothed to Maid Maleen. His father had chosen another bride for him, whose face was as ugly as her heart was wicked. The wedding was fixed, and the maiden had already arrived. But because of her great ugliness, however, she shut herself in her room and allowed no one to see her, and Maid Maleen had to take her meals from the kitchen. When the day came for the bride and the bridegroom to go to church, she was ashamed of her ugliness and afraid that if she showed herself in the streets, she would be mocked and laughed at by the people. Then said she to Maid Maleen, "A great piece of luck has befallen thee. I have sprained my foot and cannot well walk through the streets. Thou shalt put on my wedding clothes and take my place, a greater honor than that thou canst not have." Maid Maleen, however, refused it, and said, "I wish for no honor, which is not suitable for me." It was in vain, too, that the bride offered her gold. At last she said angrily, If thou dost not obey me, it shall cost thee thy life. I have but to speak the word, and thy head will lie at thy feet." Then she was forced to obey, and put on the bride's magnificent clothes and all her jewels. When she entered the royal hall, everyone was amazed at her great beauty. And the king said to his son, "This is the bride whom I have chosen for thee, and whom thou must lead to church." The bridegroom was astonished and thought, "She is like my maid Maleen, and I should believe that it was she herself. But she has long been shut up in the tower, or dead." He took her by the hand and led her to church. On the way was a nettle plant, and she said, "Oh, nettle plant, little nettle plant, what dost thou here alone? I have known the time when I ate thee unboiled, when I ate thee unroasted." "What art thou saying?" asked the king's son. "Nothing," she replied. "I was only thinking of Maid Maleen." He was surprised that she knew about her, but kept silence. When they came to the footplank into the churchyard, she said, "Footbridge, do not break. I am not the true bride." "What art thou saying there?" asked the king's son. "Nothing," she replied. "I was only thinking of Maid Maleen." "Dost thou know Maid Maleen?" "No," she answered. "How should I know her? I have only heard of her." When they came to the church door, she said once more, "Church door, break not. I am not the true bride." "What art thou saying there?" asked he. "Ah," she answered, "I was only thinking of Maid Maleen." Then he took out a precious chain, put it round her neck, and fastened the clasp. Thereupon they entered the church, and the priest joined their hands together before the altar and married them. He led her home, but she did not speak a single word the whole way. When they got back to the royal palace, she hurried into the bride's chamber, put off the magnificent clothes and the jewels, dressed herself in her gray gown, and kept nothing but the jewel on her neck, which she had received from the bridegroom. When the night came, and the bride was to be led into the prince's apartment, she let her veil fall over her face, that he might not observe the deception. As soon as everyone had gone away, he said to her, "What didst thou say to the nettle plant which was growing by the wayside?" "To which nettle plant?" asked she. "I don't talk to nettle plants." "If thou didst not do it, then thou art not the true bride," said he. So she bethought herself and said, "I must go out unto my maid, who keeps my thoughts for me." She went out and sought Maid Maleen. "Girl, what hast thou been saying to the nettle?" "I said nothing, but, O nettle plant, little nettle plant, what dost thou here alone? I have known the time when I ate thee unboiled, when I ate thee unroasted." The bride ran back into the chamber and said, "I know now what I said to the nettle." And she repeated the words which she had just heard. "But what didst thou say to the footbridge when we went over it?" asked the king's son. "To the footbridge," she answered. "I don't talk to footbridges. Then thou art not the true bride." She again said, "I must go out unto my maid, who keeps my thoughts for me," and ran out and found Maid Maleen. "Girl, what didst thou say to the footbridge?" "I said nothing, but, 'Footbridge, do not break. I am not the true bride.'" "That costs thee thy life," cried the bride. But she hurried into the room and said, "I know now what I said to the footbridge." And she repeated the words. "But what didst thou say to the church door?" "To the church door," she replied. "I don't talk to church doors." "Then thou art not the true bride." She went out and found Maid Maleen and said, "Girl, what didst thou say to the church door?" "I said nothing, but, 'Church door, break not. I am not the true bride.'" "That will break thy neck for thee," cried the bride, and flew into a terrible passion. But she hastened back into the room and said, "I know now what I said to the church door." And she repeated the words. "But where hast thou the jewel which I gave thee at the church door?" "What jewel?" she answered. "Thou didst not give me any jewel." "I myself put it round thy neck, and I myself fastened it. If thou dost not know that, thou art not the true bride." He drew the veil from her face, and when he saw her immeasurable ugliness, he sprang back terrified, and said, "How comest thou here? Who art thou?" "I am thy betrothed bride, but because I feared lest the people should mock me when they saw me out of doors, I commanded the scullery maid to dress herself in my clothes, and to go to church instead of me." "Where is the girl?" said he. "I want to see her. Go and bring her here." She went out and told the servants that the scullery maid was an impostor, and that they must take her out into the courtyard and strike off her head. The servants laid hold of Maid Maleen and wanted to drag her out, but she screamed so loudly for help that the king's son heard her voice, hurried out of his chamber, and ordered them to set the maiden free instantly. Lights were brought, and then he saw on her neck the gold chain which he had given her at the church door. "Thou art the true bride," said he, "who went with me to the church. Come with me now to my room." When they were both alone, he said, "On the way to church, thou didst name Maid Maleen, who was my betrothed bride. If I could believe it possible, I should think she was standing before me. Thou art like her in every respect." She answered, "I am Maid Maleen, who for thy sake was imprisoned 7 years in the darkness, who suffered hunger and thirst, and has lived so long in want and poverty. Today, however, the sun is shining on me once more. I was married to thee in the church, and I am thy lawful wife. Then they kissed each other and were happy all the days of their lives. The false bride was rewarded for what she had done by having her head cut off. The tower in which Maid Maleen had been imprisoned remained standing for a long time, and when the children passed by it, they sang, "Cling, clang, Gloria." Who sits within this tower? A king's daughter, she sits within. A sight of her I cannot win. The wall it will not break. The stone cannot be pierced. Little Hans, with your coat so gay, follow me, fast as you may.